My name is Paul Wolliver. I'm the owner of Pinellas Power Products. I'd like to take a few minutes to explain why my extended run fuel kits are safer and better than the through the cap system. The through the cap system will function on the ones that have the vent in the cap. They won't function really well, but they will function. They are absolutely unsafe on the ones that have the fuel tank vent in the tank. And let me take a few minutes to explain why. This is a generator, and here at the top is a fuel tank. And this line represents the line of fuel. This would be the cap, and inside the cap there is a metal pipe that runs from the cap down to the evaporative emissions canister. And let me show you one real quickly just so you understand exactly what they look like. If you see this, that's the fuel tank vent pipe coming up to just underneath the fuel cap. Okay, so that's that pipe that I just showed you, and it runs down and through the bottom of the tank, and it's welded around the bottom of the tank so it cannot leak. It then goes into an evaporative emissions canister. And let me go over the different configurations of canister. They will all have a line that goes from the fuel tank into the canister. They will all have a line that goes from the canister to the air filter. Then some of them will have a vent line. I'm not a fan of that vent line, but some of them will have it. Some of them will have a line that goes from the float bowl vent on the carburetor to the canister. I am a fan of that. I do like running anything to the canister if it has a possibility of producing fuel vapors. And then some of them will also have a drain line so that if the canister becomes overfilled, because somebody overfilled the tank and it flooded through the vent line, but if this canister becomes full, it'll drain out through the drain line. The next thing they'll have is a fuel selector valve, and that's how fuel gets from the fuel tank, goes through the selector valve that has an on-off switch on the front of the generator, through a hose, goes through the needle and seat to regulate the float level, and then on into the carburetor. So now we will show what happens if you use a through the cap fuel system on this generator. Number one, as I said earlier, there's no magic that moves fuel. It's either moved by gravity or by a fuel pump. And since there's no pump in any of these generators, then you're going to have to use gravity. So you set the tank up high. And we've got the fuel level in this tank right up here at this top line. Then these kits consist of a hose and a cap. Some of them will have a prime bulb to help you purge the air from the system. So you would pump the prime bulb until the prime bulb gets firm, and then you would go ahead and start the generator. Now, after it's been hooked up like this for a little while, whether the generator's running or not, you'll notice that this remote tank, which was either 6 or 12 or 20 gallons, is almost empty. And the stock 3 or 4 gallon tank is almost full. So where did this fuel go? Well, it's just like the person who's overfilling the fuel tank. He didn't pay attention, he didn't stop adding gas when it was full. It keeps adding gas to it. Fuel has now started running through this vent line into the evaporative emissions canister and out the drain line of the evaporative emissions canister and made a puddle all over the ground. If your system doesn't have this drain line, then it would run into the air filter area and out through the air filter drains and make a puddle all over the ground. Some of the manufacturers of this type of system tell you to unplug the fuel tank vent line from the canister and put a plug in the vent line. The problem is then, if you decide to run off the stock tank instead of the remote tank, you have to take the generator apart and remove that plug because it won't run. Air has to enter the tank at the same time that fuel is leaving the tank in order for it to work. So that's the inherent failure in the gravity feed remote tank system. The only saving grace about this one is if you look outside and you see a puddle, gasoline all around the generator, you can disconnect this hose real quickly and the problem will stop fairly soon. Okay, so this brings us to absolutely the most dangerous of the fuel transfer systems I've ever seen in my life. What this uses is the remote tank literally screws down over the stock tank, and it's held on by that quarter turn fuel cap. And if you've ever owned a gasoline engine before in your life, and you know that if you fill this stock tank full and then put the quarter turn cap on and lean the generator on its side or at an angle, you'll notice that these caps leak. Now, while they may have gone to great detail and pains to make this a very good quality seal, the bottom half is stock and it was only meant to stop splashing fuel. So here's what happens. You would then fill the remote tank, which is a fixed size. If it's only a 5-gallon remote tank, then you can only have 5 more gallons of fuel. Whereas if you had a remote tank that's 10, 20, 50, 100 gallons or whatever, like the other systems that use a remote tank, at least you'd have some options. Here you're limited. The next thing is, if you fill this up and this starts leaking here, there's nothing you can do except for grab a fire extinguisher and sit there and wait for all this fuel to run down to here. If it's not leaking at the cap, it may also be leaking through the vent into the evaporative emissions canister and onto the ground. Now this company does tell you to disconnect the vent hose from the tank and put a plug in it. I'm not a fan of plugging vent lines. Now your vent would have to vent through this cap and into the atmosphere, so you'd have fuel vapors around here, as opposed to into the evaporative emissions canister and disposed of in a safer manner. So this system, number one, limits the size of the remote tank. Number two, has a potential for a large leak right here with no recourse, no emergency shutoff, nothing. If you at least had a remote tank that was gravity feed and it was starting to leak, you could disconnect the hose and stop the leak in its tracks. This, there's nothing you can do about it. Which brings us to my system. This is the Pinellas Power Products system. You'll notice the remote tank is down on the ground next to the generator. There is a pump in my system. It's not gravity feed, so if the generator shuts off for any reason whatsoever, it stops transferring fuel. I've got 7 different specifications of pumps that I use in my kits, and that's because I have different kits for almost 80 different types of generator. Some are electric, some are pulse. Depends on what generator it's going to be used on. You'll notice that the generator is the same inside here. The basic principle of my kit is that you take the line after the fuel shutoff valve, and instead of running it directly to the carburetor, you run it to a T-fitting. And then the fuel inlet hose runs to a T-fitting. Then it runs to the fuel pump, and then it runs from the pump to the carburetor. On my pulse systems, there's a third hose that goes to the pulse port. And my pulse port I locate in the valve cover, and that's why I have an additional PCV valve that you would use to replace the stock positive crankcase ventilation valve. On the electric fuel pumps, you will have an electric line that runs to a switch block so that the pump is only powered when the generator is actually running. So the tank, number one, you can use any size tank you want, unlike the one that screws onto the top of the generator. That you're limited to the tank that comes with it. My kits, you can use anywhere from a 1 to 100 gallon tank if you want it. Depends on how long you need to run. The next thing is, because it is a pump system, there's no danger of fuel gravity flowing. If you want to run it off the stock tank, you open the stock fuel valve and you disconnect this fitting. If you want to run it off the remote tank, you put the stock fuel valve in the closed position and you hook up the remote hose. Let me show you real quick. On this Duromax, to run it off the remote tank, you'd put the fuel valve in the off position and you'd hook up the remote hose. To run it off the stock tank, you'd disconnect the remote hose from here, you'd put your fuel valve in the on position, and you're good to go. On this Westinghouse, if you want to run it off of the remote tank, you hook up the remote tank to this fitting, You take this fuel selector valve right here and you put it in the off position. If you want to run it off a stock tank, you put this fuel selector valve in the on position and you disconnect this hose. So with my kits, you have the freedom to run off the stock tank or off the remote tank as you so choose, and you can put any size remote tank you want on it. If you have any questions on my almost 80 different models of generator, please go to my website at PinellasPowerProducts.com. If you look in the description section of this video, you'll see that there's a link to my website. If you need to get in touch with me, please do not attempt to contact me through YouTube. Please go through the website. I do not monitor the YouTube comments because I simply don't have the time. But if you call me or email me, you will reach me almost immediately. I thank you for your time.